He left me in labor to be with his lover. I walked away without a word. And it shattered him. The betrayal begins. The hospital room was dim, lit only by the soft flickering fluorescent light overhead. The monitor beside the bed beeped steadily, echoing the heartbeat of a child not yet born. Pain lanced through her belly, sharp and relentless. She gritted her teeth, breathing in and out just as the nurse had instructed, yet her eyes were not focused on the pain. They were locked on the phone in her hand. He wasn't there. She had called, messaged, and even pleaded. Where was he? She was in labor. His child was arriving into the world, and yet the screen on her phone remained dark and silent. Hours passed. Nurses came in and out. The pain grew worse. Contractions came faster. And still no sign of him. Earlier that day, he'd said he was going to grab some food. He kissed her forehead like everything was fine, whispered a promise that he'd be right back, and walked out the door with a reassuring smile. But that was 6 hours ago. Her chest felt tighter than her womb. The contractions were physical, but the real pain, raw, hot, devastating, was emotional. She knew deep down this wasn't about traffic or missed calls. She had felt the shift in his heart months ago. Late-night texts, secretive calls, sudden trips. His arms held her, but his heart no longer beat for her. And now he had chosen his lover over the mother of his child. Tears blurred her vision. The pain was unbearable. Not just the labor but the betrayal. Her body was splitting apart to bring life into the world, while he lay in another woman's arms. When the nurse came in and asked again if there was someone she could call, she shook her head and lied. No one. Because that's what it had come to. Just her. Alone. Broken. Forgotten. She gave birth without him. And as the baby's first cry pierced the air, she didn't cry with joy. She cried in silence. Her lips trembled, her body trembled, but no sound escaped. She kissed the tiny warm forehead of the child she'd carried for months, and in that quiet moment, made a promise not to beg, not to scream, not to shout. Just to walk away. Without a word. The days after. The next few days passed in a blur of silence. He returned later that night with a weak excuse and guilt painted all over his face. Said his phone died. Said he got caught in a situation. Said he loved her. But he didn't say where he really was. He didn't know she'd seen the tagged photo online. The one with him holding another woman's waist in a candlelit restaurant, the exact hour she was screaming through contractions. She didn't confront him. Didn't argue. She nodded, smiled faintly, and let him hold the baby, pretending not to notice how he avoided her eyes. She could have screamed. She could have thrown the phone at him and shattered everything. But instead she simply became quiet. He had shattered something inside her the moment he left that hospital room. The part of her that still hoped, that still trusted, that still believed in their love had died. Yet she wore strength like a second skin. She kissed his cheek in front of others. She cooked dinner. She rocked the baby to sleep alone at 3 a.m. while he claimed exhaustion. She cried in the bathroom when the house was silent. And then one night she packed a bag. The walk away. It wasn't rage that filled her heart. It was peace. Painful, quiet, soul-splitting peace. She left a note. No screaming. No accusations. No threats. You left me when I needed you most. I'll never need you again. Please take care of your soul. We'll be fine. He woke up to silence. No crying baby. No sound of her humming in the kitchen. No scent of her morning tea. Just cold sheets and emptiness. At first, he thought she had gone for a walk. But then he saw the note. And it shattered him. His downfall. He tried calling. Hundreds of times. No answer. He sent messages. Long ones. Short ones. Apologies. Promises. Memories. Begs. Pleads. Voice notes filled with tears. No reply. Days turned to weeks. The walls of the house became tombs. The laughter, the warmth, the soul of his life, all gone. Replaced by silence. He told himself it wasn't real. That she'd come back. That she couldn't live without him. but she could. And she was. Flashbacks. He remembered the first time they kissed. In the rain. How she laughed, soaked and shivering, and called him her storm. He remembered the way her eyes softened when she looked at him like he was the only man in the universe. The way she wrote his name in journals. The way she waited for him to come home. He remembered how her fingers felt through his hair after a long day. How she forgave things most wouldn't. How she believed in him when even he didn't believe in himself. And he remembered the betrayal. His betrayal. How he chose fleeting pleasure over forever love. She was blooming. Meanwhile, she was building herself again. Slowly, painfully, but beautifully. She cried in secret. Missed him sometimes. But each day she grew stronger. She focused on the child. On healing. On becoming a woman who didn't just survive betrayal, but transformed because of it. There were days she felt weak. Hungry for love, for understanding, for warmth. But she refused to go back to what broke her. She fed herself with dreams. With purpose. With goals. She kissed her baby each night and whispered, "We'll never be abandoned again." She wasn't just healing. She was rising. The return. One afternoon months later he stood at her door. Tears in his eyes. Beard overgrown. Holding flowers that once would have made her smile. But she didn't smile. Her eyes, once warm, were now calm. Unreadable. Her arms crossed. Her voice quiet. "I'm sorry," he said. "I was stupid. Weak. Please, let me come home." She looked at him, and in that long moment, silence screamed louder than anything. "You already did come home," she said, nodding toward the child sleeping behind her. "To her. Not to me." He blinked, confused. "You see, she's my home now. And I won't ever let you leave her the way you left me." Then she closed the door. The rise and the ruin. The days following her decision to shut the door were strangely quiet. Not because her heart wasn't screaming inside, but because she had finally chosen peace over chaos. She knew that letting him back in would only reopen wounds that were still healing. Her hands shook a little that night after he left, as she stood by the window holding her child and watching the sky darken like her past. But there was no going back. She had walked through fire, and walking backward would only burn her all over again. He kept sending messages. "Please. Just talk to me. I can't live without you." He even left a voice note one evening, whispering that he hadn't eaten in 2 days, that he couldn't sleep in their bed anymore, that her silence was louder than any punishment he deserved. And still she didn't reply. Healing in small moments. Healing didn't happen all at once. Came in slow, fragile moments. When she made a cup of tea and realized it didn't taste like loneliness anymore. When she laughed at something silly on the radio and didn't feel guilty for smiling. When her baby touched her cheek in the middle of the night, and she realized she didn't need anyone else to make her feel loved. Sometimes she stood in the mirror and stared at her reflection, not to admire beauty, but to see the woman she was becoming. Tired, yes, but not broken. She had scars, but she wore them like medals. Proof that she had loved, trusted, lost, and survived. One night, while putting her baby to sleep, a tear rolled down her cheek, not from pain but gratitude. For the silence, for the strength, for the second chance at life she had gifted herself. His regret took root. On the other side of town, his life was crumbling. The other woman had disappeared weeks after the affair became public. She didn't want a man carrying the shame of abandonment. She didn't want a man whose phone buzzed with heartbreak. She said she couldn't live in the shadow of someone else's story. He lost everything. The laughter, the family, the late-night kisses, the breakfast laughter, the humming in the kitchen. All gone. He tried distracting himself. With work. With friends. With empty nights. But nothing dulled the ache. His guilt was louder than his excuses. His house felt like a graveyard, full of ghosts that looked like her smile. He found himself replaying old voice messages from her, reading text messages she once sent. Messages full of love, full of hope. And he wept, cried like a child into his pillow, as hunger clawed at his stomach and heartbreak tore at his chest. She had been his world. He had abandoned that world when she was most vulnerable. And now he lived in the ruins of that choice. She rose again. She didn't stay broken. She didn't stay in the shadows. He started small. Took an online class in the evenings when the baby slept. Painted her nails. Journaled every night. Slowly she built a new life. Not just as a mother but as a woman. A warrior. People began to notice. How she carried herself differently. How her eyes sparkled again. How she smiled without flinching. There were offers. Men who wanted to know her, understand her, love her. She was hesitant, guarded. But eventually she allowed herself to feel again. Not for anyone else but for herself. One evening, she walked into a coffee shop wearing a dress she hadn't worn since before her pregnancy. She caught her reflection in the glass and whispered to herself, "You're doing okay." And she was. The confrontation. Almost a year had passed when their paths crossed again. Unplanned, unexpected. She was leaving a supermarket. Her baby asleep in a carrier strapped to her chest. The sun was warm and her heart felt light. Until she saw him standing across the parking lot, frozen in place, staring at her like he'd seen a ghost. He looked thinner, paler, as if life had been draining out of him slowly since she left. Their eyes met. He walked over cautiously, carefully, like someone approaching the edge of a cliff. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, voice cracking. She hesitated, then nodded once. For closure, for strength. They sat on a nearby bench. Silence stretched between them like an ocean. Then he whispered, "I know there's nothing I can say to fix what I did. But I need you to know. I never stopped loving you." She looked at him, calm and composed. "You just stopped showing it when it mattered most," she said. He lowered his eyes. Tears spilled down his cheeks. "I think about it every day. Leaving you. Not being there. A birth. Haunts me. You were screaming in pain and I was holding someone else. I was a coward. I thought I'd come back before you noticed. But I'll never forgive myself for what I did." She nodded. "I don't hate you," she said softly. "But I'll never go back." He begged. Not loudly. But with every breath. With broken eyes. With a shattering voice. But she stood up, kissed the baby's forehead and whispered, "We already forgave you. But we're not yours anymore." She walked away. The twist, the letter he found. Months later, he received a letter in the mail. No return address. The handwriting looked familiar. Inside was a single page. "When you left that night, I didn't cry because of the pain. I cried because I realized that love doesn't always mean forever. Sometimes it means letting go. I want you to know something though. I knew about her. Long before the hospital. I stayed, hoping you'd choose us. You didn't. And I still don't hate you. You gave me the greatest gift. A child and the chance to rebuild myself from ashes. Hope you heal. I truly do." He stared at the letter for hours. Then held it to his chest and cried until dawn. She had known all along. And she had still given him a chance. The legacy. Years later, she stood in front of a crowd, speaking at a women's empowerment event. Dressed in a crisp white suit, confident and radiant, she shared her story, not to shame him but to inspire others. "How many of you have ever been left behind?" she asked the crowd. Hands raised. "How many of you thought your world ended?" More hands. "And how many of you realized later that being left was just the beginning of being found by yourself?" Applause thundered. She smiled, wiped a tear from the corner of her eye and whispered, "Then you understand." Final scene. A silent goodbye. One rainy evening. He stood in the back of a bookstore where her new book was being launched. She hadn't seen him. She was signing copies, hugging strangers, glowing with the kind of light he once knew intimately. He didn't approach. He didn't interrupt. He just watched. And when she looked up and locked eyes with him briefly, she didn't smile, didn't frown. She simply nodded. Once. Silent goodbye. Then turned back to her readers. He walked away. Alone. But not bitter. Just broken. The end.